warm here. Okay, so welcome everyone to our seventh class of David and Sheva. I'm just advertising our next class, which I'm going to send people on Zoom later as well. But starting September 6th, in the entire month of this September 6th, we're going to have a class which is called 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's get ready for 57084. 57084. Okay, and Peter noticed it's a pun. I didn't, but it's divine providence. That's going to be Wednesday, 12 o'clock, same place, same room, same lunch you could bring.
Okay.
Okay, so the first session is going to be on Rosh Hashanah, the main themes and customs. Okay, so, and I want you to also be active participants. So if you have any interesting themes or customs that you have in your homes that you grew up with or that today that you do, please bring them over here. And maybe even, I would encourage you to maybe even bring something from home. If you have like a special, honey jar or something with a memory or a challah cover or special, recipe that runs in the family, bring it with you. We're going to do the same on September 13th for Yom Kippur, just without the food. Okay, so don't bring anything that's related to that. And we're going to talk about, Yom Kippur. On September 20th, we're going to conclude with Yom Kippur, but we're also going to start with Sukkot, the holiday of the booth. And the last one will be about, that will be after Yom Kippur, September 27th, is about Simchas Torah and Shmini Atzeret. And I called it also Israel versus Diaspora because I don't know if you're aware, but in Israel, these two holidays are condensed into one holiday. So we only have Simchas Torah in Israel. Actually, we have both, but we disregard Shmini Atzeret in Israel, and we only have Simchas Torah one day. And lucky Jews in diaspora have 2 days. So it could be one is Shmini Atzeret and one is Simchat Torah. So we're going to try to understand in the Bible, where do these two holidays come from? And actually the truth is only one of them comes from the Bible. And the second one is sort of like an invented holiday later on by the rabbis. And we're going to see how dare they invent another holiday for us, the Jewish people. But it's a fun holiday, and we're going to talk about that as well. But we have a lot of art to go through with David and Sheva. So we're still there, it's like all the rabbis are thinking about the holidays already, so I'm already there. But there's just too many interesting things going on with the art centered around the story of David and Sheva. No one's here for the first time, so everyone remembers. Oh, Ronnie, you have. I don't. Oh, okay. So you want to come over here so you could help me out? Okay. So I don't know. We didn't have a chance to understand which are the ones that you have, but I also prepared some interesting interpretations.
Good.
Okay. Let's start with this painting. By the way, last week we looked at paintings from Middle Ages, early time, maybe like 11th, 12th, 13th century. We're now moving into 16th, 17th century paintings. And I want to look at two interesting paintings that are bringing a new element inside. The first one is Peter Paul Rubens, a famous Dutch artist who lived in the years of 1577 to 1640. And the painting Sheva at the Fountain is written, obviously based on the biblical story. In the center is the main character Bathsheba. And Rubens manages to convey the beauty of young Bathsheba. He showed us the beautiful, strong legs of a woman an elastic chest, and a sweet red-cheeked face. And most likely, Bathsheba washed herself in the morning by the pool when David saw her. Okay, we see here David. Wait, actually, I need to make this a little bit smaller. So the whole picture. This is 42. Okay, full screen mode. Okay, so now we see, oops, sorry. Now we see David here, right?
Oh, wow.
You see him?
Not really.
Well, but you see a figure. You see a figure here. Okay.
Shadow almost.
Men are just not that important.
Obviously.
Right. So what is interesting is that the lady at the back is brushing the golden lock curls of Bathsheba, and a black kid gives things to her, and more attention is attracted by a small dog, which is probably Bathsheba's favorite. She looks like a young girl. The girl herself is looking off into the distance. There's a smile in her face, and there's a light in her eyes. A girl is sitting on she's sitting on an armchair, and this is all very clear. Beautiful in the picture and background, actions take place in the palace. Therefore, behind the heroes, there's a majestic arch, stone walls, and flower pots. And David himself is in the upper left corner. His figure is almost invisible. One can only slightly see that he's wearing a golden dress. And Rubens was able to convey the true beauty of the world, and he found beauty in women. Therefore, many believe that Rubens portrayed the ideal of the female figure, and experts find this ideal in Bathsheba. So I want you to remember this painting, and also the black maid who's handing over the letter to Bathsheba. And I want to go over to the next picture, which is Rembrandt from 1654. And we're going to go back to the Rubens painting in a minute, and we're going to compare both. Bathsheba with King David's letter is the name of this picture, painting. He has moved on from the opening scene to an imagined moment later in time. Bathsheba is again at her bath, this time in the privacy of her bedchamber, her feet being cared for by an old and presumably worldly wise maid or nurse. I changed the order a little bit just for the sake of these. And clutching Bathsheba's right hand is a letter. The title tells us from the king himself. Her eyebrows are raised in surprise. You can see her eyebrows. And she stares dreamily down at her attendant, which is at her feet. We must presume that this letter is the king's invitation to her to join with him in adultery, and Rembrandt skillfully heightens the suspense in the lighting and enhances the intimate detail with Bathsheba's jewelry and ornamented hair. The crumpled sheets behind her make it clear that David's invitation isn't to a public engagement, but to a very private one. Bathsheba's expression and poise tells much of the story. She has a look of the inevitable with more than a tinge of regret. She must already have been wondering how this would work out with her husband, whose fate clearly rested with the king too. Rembrandt's model for this masterpiece was his mistress, Hendrike Stoffels, who had previously been his maid. After his wife died in 1642, just before his earlier paintings of Bathsheba, Stoffels and Rembrandt lived together as a couple. Okay.
Just a little question.
Yeah?
They didn't have paper then. It would have to be parchment, wouldn't it?
No, I think they had paper. This is already 1654.
It's still able to be written.
No, but I mean,
They're
referring to Bathsheba's time, not Rembrandt's time.
So so that's a very good question. And there's a very interesting article by Anna Maria Neyman, who is an expert on paintings in that era. And she says that Rembrandt must have been particularly taken with the story of Bathsheba. He devoted himself to the subject twice. And he has one painting from 1643, which is now in the Metropolitan in New York, and the later from 1654, okay, many years later, is in the Louvre in Paris. And what is interesting, we all note, is the letter that's in her hand. And we know, was there a letter in our story?
No.
Right, so there was
Sends a
no
message.
letter in the story. So this is an interpretation. So we talked about how the sages, how the rabbis give their interpretation to the story for the reasons that they had. So Rembrandt is the first one that introduces the letter, and then, by the way, the letter is a theme throughout the entire, till the 21st century art of David and Bathsheba. The letter is inside. It's a very important component, which Rembrandt plants in this picture and is imitated after by everyone. Yes.
In the original story, the king sends one of his men.
Messengers.
That takes place, the letter takes the place.
Yeah.
He sent a
Kind
message.
of like texting. You don't have to show up.
Wait, so
Who was first, Rubens or Rembrandt?
no, it was no, it wasn't Rubens.
Wasn't Rubens?
Rembrandt.
Rubens is before Rubens? Rubens is-
No, yeah, maybe Rubens was the first one.
I think so.
Yeah.
So he had the letter.
Rembrandt.
Often when a letter is shown, either the figure of David is obliterated entirely, or it's so foggy you're not even sure that it's not some smudge in a corner.
Okay. So it might be that Rembrandt stole this from Rubens, but everyone attributes the letter to Rembrandt. He's like the author of that idea.
This is all of Rembrandt's style with the dark, obscure, and putting on.
Now,
You know what I
the
always say
question
about that?
is,
It's like being in the kitchen, a dark kitchen at night.
so
You
the
open
question
the
is that
refrigerator door, that light is
Dr.
Rembrandt's.
Neiman asks is, why is there a letter? And I want to, before giving her answer, I want to ask you, why would there be a letter inserted? Okay? Let's go back to the story. How does Bathsheba know that David wants her?
Sends a messenger.
Sends a messenger, right? Okay. What's the difference between a messenger and sending a letter?
Interpretation.
Okay.
It's more
It's more
private.
personal.
Yes,
It's more private.
There
Okay.
isn't a witness, so to speak.
But in those days,
You have to deliver the
weren't
letter.
women illiterate anyway?
Right. Okay, that's true. But
That's
that's
a
not the
very
concern.
fish upper class.
That's not the concern. So he imagines that she is a woman that knows how to read. But
So
that's a good
I
point.
think what we're looking at art. So we're looking at a perspective of the artist. What is the message of the artist? Not really the message of the reality of it. He's focusing on her emotions, on her experience, and what he's trying to say, she just gets bad news, because if you look at her face, this person just got bad news. But that's his perception. So if you send a messenger, you may get the same kind of bad news, but there's a power issue. This is a very intimate painting of Rembrandt's perception of what Bathsheba felt like.
Right. And what is she feeling like?
I think she feels pretty sad, like pretty caught in a trap. When I look at that,
Yeah.
I feel of a woman who's caught in a trap.
I named all these paintings under one title, Complicit or Compliant.
Yeah, that's the issue.
And
with
that's what I was looking at constantly.
That's a good way.
Okay, exactly. That's very, so what she says is that Bathsheba, who according to the story in the Bible, is directly confronted with the messenger and thus has an immediate answer to give, because there's a messenger waiting. Okay, ma'am, are you coming or not? So when there's a letter, she's giving a grace period by Rembrandt. Okay, she's now isolated with the letter. She gains time to make a momentous decision. So just like David had that impulse and had to run, after his impulse and do one after the other, okay, it was like sort of, but he made decisions, one decision after the other, bad, wrong decisions. But Sheva now sort of like has also her time to, because if there's a messenger and saying, you need to come to the king, she needs to pack up and come to the king. Rembrandt sort of like pauses and he gives that time, okay, and to make, which she beautifully frames it as a momentous decision, right? The isolation is further emphasized by the setting of the scene in an intimate room of the home. It's not like she's surrounded by people. She's alone here just with her maid. Her maid doesn't know what's in the letter. She's the only, it's very clear she's reading it. She's not sharing it with everyone. She's very sad, but she's also thinking. She's like thinking, what will be of my life now? And Bathsheba's gaze seems to reveal that she's carrying out an inner conflict. She's clearly struggling with the question of whether she should oppose her ruler's wishes or whether she should commit adultery. She's probably even weighing up the consequences she would have to face should she decide against visiting the royal house. For both options endanger her own safety as well as that of her husband's. Okay, so she has very tough choices to make here,
He's essentially bringing up something that's not really in the written story. We don't know what she thought at any time. We just know what her actions were.
Exactly. And this is what her next line is. Rembrandt's reduced pictorial composition and the impressive focus on Bathsheba's lost in thought musing seem to be a very special interpretation of the pictorial theme, especially with a view to the pictorial tradition. And a direct comparison of the work with, for example, Peter Paul Rubens' Bathsheba, which is from 1635, okay, reveals a very different design of the desirable woman. Next to Rembrandt's Bathsheba, which is completely free of subplots and decorative props, Rubens' Bathsheba seems almost overloaded. Rubens stages the bather as a seductress who, however, does not yet know what message is about to be conveyed to her. While the servant does Bathsheba's hair, a messenger appears to deliver David's message. The king can be seen in the background on his balcony, indicating once again that this is a voyeuristic scene. So while Rembrandt clearly focuses on the ominous consequences of Bathsheba's decision, this aspect is almost lost in Rubens' work. Only a yapping dog in the foreground seems to warn of the impending conflict, right? Because we see the dog is barking at the maid who's bringing that letter, sort of like he's the only one who's, aware of what's going on. But drapery, a fountain whose water glistens in the evening sun, and pearl jewelry wrapped around Bathsheba's wrist serve as decorative elements. They characterize Bathsheba above all as a seductress, while Rubens' Bathsheba is not yet aware of the approaching message and thus enjoys her evening beauty ritual in light-heartedness. Rembrandt's Bathsheba has long been aware of her plight. And in fact, she concludes, the pictorial element of washing in both paintings characterizes very specific personality designs of Bathsheba. Rubens' Bathsheba is coiffed, her top knots adorned with ribbons, one might think especially for an upcoming appointment. This contrasts with Rembrandt's Bathsheba, whose ablution is more like an ordinary cleansing. The Bible also speaks of the cleansing of Bathsheba from her impurity. What is meant is the ritual cleansing at the end of the female menstruation. In the Bible, therefore, the washing does not serve to mark a vain beauty ritual, but rather to illustrate the fact that Bathsheba was in the fertile phase of her cycle when David observed her. Okay, so this explains how the pregnancy could have occurred, because Rembrandt's Bathsheba, especially in comparison to that of Rubens, is not staged as a vain seductress, she consistently evades the accusation of voluptuous devotion in favor of the wishes of her powerful suitor. So it's also very interesting that Rembrandt, in a way, is more, loyal to the biblical story, except for that letter. But if he takes that letter from Rubens, or maybe even before Rubens, there's a reason. There's a reason he has that letter, because it gives us more suspense to the story.
Well, the painters.
And was that just poetic license to stick a dog in the picture?
Yeah, that was a.
Well, I think
It's
the
like being in
dog.
France, you all have dogs.
Well, we said last week that the dog is also a symbol of a loyalty. We saw that, and that sort of like maybe hints also to Uriah, that was very loyal to the king. Loyal, like the dog is loyal to their masters. So was Uriah, and that's sort of like also the warning. Okay, because Uriah is now in the battlefield, but here's the dog warning Bathsheba, beware of this, this scene. And we can almost see that, the gaze in Rubens' painting, she's intrigued to know what's in the letter, what's going on with that letter. She's sort of like asking for it, as opposed to the other painting where Rembrandt, so we really see her dilemma there.
And Rembrandt, Rabbi, I think Rembrandt also makes us stop to think, did she feel where the comment was that the king really controlled her husband's fate? You could almost see her thinking, but if I don't go, what might he do to my husband so that I will go in the future? And that's something we didn't discuss before, but I could almost see that going through her head as I look at that picture.
Yeah, beautiful. I like that very much. Yes, Naomi.
Also, the rumpling of the letter means that she has read it and has pondered and is conflicted. It's very rumpled. It's not like a new thing that she just read.
Oh, beautiful. So she's read it a few times already, and she's really distressed. Although it is interesting, she's nude bathing. So there's and someone is watching.
You mean her man? Maid?
Well, it's us, but maybe we are like King David in a way, watching her, because we don't see King David anywhere
No,
else.
he's not there.
He's not there.
The difference in styles between Rubens and Rembrandt, and Rubens' paintings always are full. People,
Right.
animals, and so on. Where Rembrandt is almost always not entirely focused on individuals
Yeah.
in his art.
I did what you asked me to do, Zalika. I went and I found easy peasy, almost monosyllable definitions of eras. And Rubens, if you watch it, it's a classical early Renaissance, because he is highlighting in the background, he's in the background, but not only a perch for the king, but an ancient building, if you will. It's a structure.
Palace.
Well, this is palace, but the thing is that it's an ancient structure. And if you go to Rembrandt, there is no structure, there is no setting other than you are invited to the room. Whereas early Renaissance has the structures of palaces, gardens, ornate environments that are in antiquity and recognized as such. Whereas mid to late Renaissance no longer does that. It invites you into the picture. And I thought that because you asked me to do that, I should
You did
do
a
that.
good job.
Well, thanks, Mom.
Okay, so now we're moving
Because
on.
perspective came in.
Okay.
Well, perspective as soon as the Middle Ages is over. Yeah.
Okay. Now we have just other example from a German artist, Koenig. Okay. I don't have much to say about this, but it's also interesting to compare this one, and but it's very clear that Sheva is a rich woman. She has 3 maids, all mending for her. Although it's interesting that this maid is naked. This one is also, so it's not 100% clear who they are all about. There's a lot of water flowing, and everything moves, and we see the palace in the background. That goes back to that theme, that threatening palace in the background.
I like to see anything from that palace.
But again,
Yeah,
the German style is very, you would think it had modern overtones. It just has superstructure and fine line. It's not as fluid.
Yes, George?
Anything about red hair in the Bible?
That David was red hair.
Sheva has red hair, and everything.
Oh,
Is there some symbolism in the Bible about red
oh, the red hair? No, there's nothing about that. Just that David had red hair.
hair? Artistic symbolism?
It often means a bit of a harlot. It doesn't always, but it often means.
Interesting.
Okay, and again, henna was used, and if you used henna or anything, you weren't looked down upon. That wasn't it, but you might be more of a free spirit from that angle.
Yeah. Now we see the statues.
What color is my hair? Quick.
We see statues throughout the painting. So here's another statue of this. I'm not familiar with it. It's probably one of the Greek mythology. But we
Isn't
young.
that
Is that Cupid?
Is that Cupid? Okay.
Oh,
so,
that's Cupid.
Yeah,
okay, and
With his
he's
balls on a ball,
Yeah.
folks.
yeah, and he's being sent. Sort of like King David. Maybe King David wants to. He's older, and maybe he wants to be like that. Cupid again, sending sort of like his message of love in the background. This is sorry.
It's an earlier style, flat.
Yeah, it's on copper. It's on
That's
copper
why,
plate.
because it's on copper plate.
It's
It's much more rigid.
yeah,
Yeah, it's harder to work with.
harder to work with, of course. This is an Italian painter. Okay, here's an interesting one by William Drost. Okay, he was an apprentice of Rembrandt, and this is sort of like a response to Rembrandt's painting done in the same year. And Drost Sheva holds the letter where she just learned that she has been requested by the king. She knows that what this means, the viewer knows she's beautiful, and this version of Bathsheba does as well. It almost looks modern. There's a sense that this isn't the first proposition she's received while her husband has been away, but it might be the first she cannot refuse. Her face is a vacant mask, emptying her body of herself. Perhaps the king can take her physically, but he cannot have what makes her, her. So here's like just an innocent young woman who's about to be cropped from life and, sort of like be taken to the king. It's just a beautiful painting.
They begin to look like the Kardashians. Follow that idea.
What period is this?
If you're taking
This is also 17th century.
Again, it's Renaissance.
It is?
Yes, it
It's
is.
Rembrandt's apprentice. Okay, another 17th century. Okay, here we have again Cupid, right in the middle.
Germany again.
Right, and Bathsheba is here smaller with her, but the center is all these mighty statues. And she's actually in the palace, and David is here. So this is like all part of the palace. It almost makes her part of like that, companionship of the,
And it's
like she
much
lives
more,
there.
it's much more public than the other paintings we've seen. The situation here is much more public. And there are couples as you go through the arches. They're not all statues. There are many couples coupling.
Oh, making love in
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
That's interesting. That.
And Cupid is exploding.
Right.
So you've got all those overtones to this one.
Lots of
Yeah.
sexual energy there.
Yeah.
Another interesting by Cornelius Bishop, okay, and he mixes two scenes here where she is soaking her feet in the pond with the king watching her. here on the right side, the top right, and she's reading the letter, which is the invitation from the warrior king in distance, and in front of her are apples hanging on a tree in a reference to Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Isn't she, he's the feeling of that painting is really depression.
A lot of
Not for the, they're alone, but I wouldn't call them depressed.
Well,
They're wary, but not depressed.
well, look at the shape of her back, it's like, oh, God.
Well, I have to say she looks resigned. Okay.
In those days, if you were part of the king's household, when you were like, you know, like you were a prisoner of the household, and it was lovely inside, but you couldn't go out.
You couldn't go out. We like a golden cage. Women did not go out for sure. And what is interesting is that there is light on the side, on the left side of her body, if she chooses not to go. And there's dark. It's dark on the right side if she goes to the palace towards the king and towards that forbidden fruit. So it's like that. And there's light also in our area. So we, the viewers, know that she's making a choice now, which is either right or wrong, light or darkness, in many ways. And the apples in the background, which I think is fascinating. So like the original thing. Yeah.
Well, it's the reverse, because she tempted Adam with an apple. Here he's tempting her without even offering an apple, but she's amongst the apples.
Right, but exactly, and she can make the choice, and she has to choose. The setup is just beautiful. Obviously, there's no apples also in the biblical story. That's a Christian motif. Okay.
Again, there's no letter either.
And there's no letter, right? Okay, I don't know who the artists here, Italian on canvas, but look at this, the painting and the background with everything that's happening here. This looks like the end of days.
Yes, it's tumultuous.
Yeah.
Is there anything in the story that would indicate that she was well off? I mean, everything's got servants.
Yeah. I mean, if he's like a senior officer in the army and her roof is not far away from the king, so it means she's pretty close there. It means like
she lives in the right district.
It's like location, so it seems like she's in a good location. Here, Chiari. This is a 17th, 18th century.
New York.
It's in the Metropolitan.
I wonder if I saw.
Okay, here's King David. Look at the way he's looking at her like this. Like what's going to be, her decision. And she's shown her beauty, and that's what she's focused on. And that's what he's focused on. And there's no indication. There's no letter here. It's not clear what's going to happen. No messenger. This is like the moment before, the thought before. Here, I just thought this was also very clever by Giordano Luca. And we see, is that Cupid again?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he's like flowing, as you said, with water and
but
all
he's the only peaceful object in that elevated scene. All that work above, the sky, the background is tumultuous.
And you see the king here, yeah?
Yeah. So that, he's just taking a break. Cupid's at rest.
Yeah, but look at all the commotion down below, all these women down below that are all around Bathsheba, who's all the light and focus is on her. It's all like humanity depended on this figure in many, many ways. Okay, another interesting photo. I did not have anything specific to say about it. The next one is David spying on Bathsheba. I did not find David here. Okay, and the king is watching from his balcony. I guess that's somewhere over here.
If you look at her mirror, see where her mirror is raised?
Yeah.
It's to the upper right. He's there.
Oh.
She's looking. Is it complicit? She's looking at him. He's looking at her.
Okay, beautiful. And again, she's all lit.
Yeah. Well, she's our baby.
Right. Here's a letter again okay, at the 18th century in the Budapest Museum. And again, all these ladies are surrounded around her, and King David is on the balcony keeping. Here's the letter again, and all the maids here. Everyone's like, "Oh, what is that letter? What is it all about?" And I don't know if we could see David here. Maybe that's here, this figure here in the background. But they're all fascinated and waiting to see what's in that letter.
Yes.
Okay, this is an interesting picture. They're all just laying there
has
like
more,
like a siesta. It
servants.
looks like they all were drinking. It's like a feast. Okay, almost. And the way the legs are spread out, it's out in the open. This, this painter, the Troy, is almost like accusing her and the girls and the whole, entourage that she has of, this is the way you were acting. This is like, sort of like what you're going to get afterwards. It's like they're all bored. They're all like looking for it. This is sort of like
none of them are old
implying.
women.
Right.
No, it's like a Roman orgy in that picture.
And some of the other ones, she had a more innocent look.
Right. And here he doesn't give that to them. Another beautiful painting in Lisbon. Okay, if there was anything you wanted to add about this.
No.
Here's our dog again,
Again,
barking.
and you can see King David in the balcony. There you go. In the balcony.
Yeah, again, just like like that.
But there's no
watching.
messenger and there's no letter yet. She's just being observed.
Right.
Did Sheva spend most of her time in the nude?
Oh, yeah. in these
Only
pictures, right.
when she was posing for pictures.
Right. Think of all these women throughout centuries that were posing as Bathsheba, standing for hours in front of the artists, right? And he's like, wait, I have to look at the Bible story again, and how did that work, right? In the 1800s, Italian painter Francesco Hayes created a string of portraits of women, some biblical in nature, like his version of Bathsheba, who he depicts sans letter and handmaidens. Hayes' Bathsheba is a classic beauty, more sensual than religious, which, although she's wearing, right, like a religious, and more, and it makes sense giving Hayes' penchant for painting odalisques and concubines. Her hand dipped in to test the bath water. It's as if the viewer has walked in on Bathsheba to give her the news, to tell her something she may have been hoping for. Perhaps bathing in the open was meant to entice the king, and here her moment of truth. This Bathsheba is testing the water in more ways than one. Very interesting painting and also commentary on the painting.
Rabbi, I thought she was supposed to be getting in and out of the mikveh, and there would be no choice but for that to be on the top of the roof. She would have, that's where she would be. It wouldn't be something intentional to be shown necessary to show herself. Or am I all wrong about the mikveh?
Well, the mikveh would not actually be on top of the roof. It would be maybe closer to some sort of like fountain, like a natural fountain, and or more in the ground. So it's not really clear why the Bible stresses that she is bathing upon the roof, and it could be, that. The whole concept of a mikveh in the Bible is not the same concept as it in rabbinic Judaism, because the laws of the mikveh and how much water it needs to be and that it comes from a flowing water, that's later on, that's after the Bible. Those are like interpretations on the Bible. So it's not 100% clear, is she bathing for a fun, or is she bathing to cleanse herself from her period? The story indicates that she's bathing to cleanse herself from the period, but because it's not the traditional mikveh, it's a little bit confusing. And William Blake, a well-known artist, has also an interesting, here's King David on the right, and she's here with very young, I don't know, maids that are accompanying. It's not very clear who they are. Scottish artist David Wilkie has not seen Blake's work, but his Sheva from 1815 is also set in the countryside. Sheva is now beside a small stream where she has been bathing and is just putting on stocking, and we see the king sort of like peeping behind. Where is he? Behind the tree. Maybe that's him hidden in some way. And he's like a voyeurist, right? He's like peeping on her. And this reminds her the story of Susanna and the two elders. Are you familiar with the story of Susanna and the two elders? No. It's a very strong Christian motif. My mother mentioned it last week as well in her comments. It's actually a story. At the time, it was probably written as the Tanakh was sort of like closed down. That story probably existed and was edited out. Is this woman, her name is Susanna, Shoshana, and she was a beautiful woman, and these two older men are peeping on her bathing, just like Sheva, so they're peeping on her, and that reminds us of King David, and maybe that's the reason that this story was cut out of the Bible. They decide to have, they both get together, and I saw this beautiful woman, and they both agree that they want to have sex with her, and they come to her and they say that, and she says, go away, I'm not interested. And they decide to plot against her and say, if you will not have sex with her, we will take you to court and we will testify that you were sleeping around with a young man while your husband was away, okay? Just like Uriah is away. So you're going to be accused of that. And she is faced with that dilemma. And that dilemma is painted throughout history by many artists, because this story is also ancient and it's in the Christian literature. And then Susanna is taken to court. And as she's about to be executed, because these two honest men from the community are testifying, so, who would think that they would make up a story like that, because they're two well-respected elders of the community. Sounds like a horrible story that might even happen these days, right? Daniel, okay, from the book of Daniel, shows up as an angel, and the judges sort of like start questioning the two elders on a lot of questions, and they were asking, like, under what tree was she when this happened? And they both give two different answers of the trees, and that's how it's found out through sort of like Daniel's insight to the judges. It's found out that they were lying, and they are executed, and she becomes a hero for not going with the temptation. Yes. So there are a lot of parallels to this story, which are also interesting to talk about, and if people have questions about that as well, maybe if my brother wants to add anything.
Virtually all of the depictions of Sheva that we've seen, she looks like she goes to the health club all the time. Are there any depictions in history of women that aren't so svelte and so pretty appealing?
Yes, we will see one very soon. Not this one, but we will see one. Any comment about the Susanna comparison? Okay, but but I found it very, very interesting that King David is that in comparison to those elders. And I think that's a good reason why that story was edited out of the Bible.
It's in Daniel, though, isn't it?
It's at the end of Daniel, but it was cut out from the Bible. It's not in the Bible.
So we
That
don't
story.
consider it part of the Tanakh.
It's not part of the Tanakh, right? So here is a rare picture depicting the act of David's seduction is rare, but here we have the king mounting the sofa just to get close to a rather disinterested Bathsheba. Look at her face. The king is quite a bit smaller compared to Bathsheba, childlike in his attempt to an embrace. The artist's inclusion of David is almost to mock him, to say, here's a man that can't get a woman any other way than by force. This Bathsheba is in complete control. You hope maybe this time things will work out for her. We know that they didn't, but at least in this picture, we are looking at it in a different angle.
And what's interesting is it's a more modern theme set in the old traditional Renaissance. So they're even thinking then,
Right, not everyone looks at the woman as
as bait.
Right. Okay, and here's a very interesting question, a picture, a painting of Julius Schnorr von Barolsfeld, and she has her hand out, sort of to the fountain, and I'm trying to figure, and here we see David on the left side, and what is she asking for?
A little spritz.
Snoring.
A little spritz.
She's like snoring, right? She's like a beggar.
Is she getting water from?
Yeah, she says, spritz. A little
Is that it? Is that all she's doing?
Yeah, or imploring
Yes,
for something.
Well, I
It's
think
like she's
the water is a
imploring.
cleanse.
She's
Well, her
like,
face isn't
and she has her back to David. She's
Yeah.
not interested
Yeah.
in his sexual proposal, and she wants to be left alone. And she's sort of like praying to God, asking, or maybe like a beggar is asking, like, have mercy on me. It's sort of like, I think it's a double play on that.
Nice
She's also
pictures
trying
of
to cover
Mary.
herself up a little bit.
Well, is this before the affair or after?
This is before.
If he's still warrioring.
Yeah, right. He's wondering. So it's,
But if you
He's also
walk by
a little
any of these
shyer
pictures in
there.
a museum, you'd never stop to see David in the corner there. I mean, only if somebody brings it to your
It's like the
attention.
Barbie movie. He's only Ken.
right. Okay, so here's
Wait, go back to that previous picture. If you'll notice the water coming out of the fountain, it reminds me of the fountain in Belgium, where you have the water coming out of the buoy in the fountain. And here, this is definitely a phallic symbol where the water is coming out on the bottom.
Right, very good. And I don't know what's this in the background, this vessel here on the white cloth.
Was David unattractive? I mean,
No, David was very attractive. He was the most beautiful one in that period of time.
Is he old?
He's older here. He's probably, after all the wars, he's probably in his, I don't know, he lived till 70, but he's probably here in his 50s, because Solomon is born soon after. So here's an interesting Russian artist, Alexander Ivanov, and here's King David naked with, his crown or decorated crown, and Bathsheba's, not blonde, not red-haired, strong Russian woman, maybe. Alexander Ivanov's watercolor work conveys to the audience the image of Bathsheba, and it was written by a Russian artist in 1843 with watercolors on paper in a book for personal records. Air colors of blue and red. Watercolors are diluted with dark green light touches of the brush. In the foreground, basins and a jug of water. A naked girl bends down to wash the washcloth. Her body outlines are dim, eye-catching, long, wavy black hair. Behind the vegetable fence sits a dumbfounded David with a loving gaze. He digs into what is happening behind a deciduous tree. A lot of personal in the painting Batsheva. Ivanov, in the years of its writing, was captivated by acquaintances with Maria Apraxina, but his beloved woman married another, and the artist turns to the Bible in search of a way out of the tragedy that has happened in his life. Okay, so it's interesting. He sort of like almost emphasizes with David, sort of like looking for that, his beloved woman, and but she's gone. She's already busy with other things, and obviously, you can only take her by force. Okay. We see here the king. See him in the background. And Gustave Moreau. Now we're already at the 19th century with a French painter. This is a very interesting painting. Jean-Léon Gérôme, 1889, painting of Batsheva, shows a carefree young woman enjoying the view of the city and fresh air on her skin. After a trip to Egypt and the north of Africa, Gérôme's work took in the influences from his travels, and here his Batsheva fits inside that landscape in front of the whole city. This is not a woman with many worries, just simple pleasures. Her feet comforted by a fancy rug, gorgeous flowers line in the sill. She's even chosen the perfect time of day to be outside. The sky, pink and yellow, soft and calming. Gérôme's Batsheva fits in with his penchant for the female nude, and whether painting slaves, concubines, or a nude at the bath, he always instilled the canvas with an aura of sensuality and eroticism. And perhaps Gérôme is guilty of focusing on the superficial beauty of a nude woman, and he's not the first, but by turning his eye to the biblical realm of the King David and Bathsheba story, he's placed his figure in an odd light with her husband gone to battle and living alone. This Bathsheba has no cares in the world. Her densely robed handmaid prepares the water and looks on. Gérôme painted her under an unreal shadow, while Bathsheba is a bright and glowing figure. His own comment on the roles of the two women. This, all of it, might be the fate of a character, a symbol of the put upon women for aggressive men, or the pressure put upon women for aggressive men, a righteous follower and believer, a sultry vixen or a prop, an excuse for nudity in art. She becomes more a reflection of the viewer than a being unto herself. So it's very interesting because we as viewers are seeing, like we are really at the front, right? It's really meant for us.
Sounds more like
here,
a commentator.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Paul Cézanne, the famous French impressionist, painted at least two different versions of Batsheva in his career. He does not show King David, and it's beautiful to see the clouds. I would say the clouds are like King David. They're like people coming to swallow Bathsheba and sort of like to merge the clouds all together. She's under a palm tree. This is Bathsheba 2 by Paul Cézanne, which is also beautiful. Maurice Denis painted in Bathsheba in many paintings. In the biblical figure sits in the garden, and he's the founder of the Nabi movement. You know the Nabi movement?
No,
I did not know anything about it. And apparently this affected with the rigidly representational painting methods taught at the academic Julian, Bernard, and Denise joined with other like-minded students in the fall of 1888 to form a brotherhood called the Nabis, a Hebrew word meaning prophets, Navi. Okay, Navi, like Nevi'im, so Nabi, they called it prophets. The group was spearheaded by Paul Saussure, who had visited Paul Gauguin in Pont-Aven over the summer and was now spreading an aesthetic message based on his interpretation of Gauguin's symbolism. Okay, it reminds us a little bit of Gauguin. Here, your question is answered here. Lovitz Corinth had become interested in and painted Susanna and the elders early in his career. So there are a lot of paintings that he did of Susanna, but he appears not to have been so enthused over this story. So his Batsheva from 1908 is a curious treatment. Batsheva herself is not the most attractive of the nudes, which Corinth painted, and lies back on her bed, holding a red rose in her right hand, looking dreamily at the viewer. Besides her is a maid whose form is much looser, but there's no sign of David.
It's almost post-coital.
Uh-huh.
It is. It's almost post-coital, and she's very grateful.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
She's not attractive.
No, but she's sure happy.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Interesting.
I said it's
That is a
post-coital.
smile.
Here's an amazing bronze figure of King David and Bathsheba, and this beautiful statue. And this is the last one for today, where Franz von Stuck in 1912, and he painted apparently a lot of femme fatales. And look at King David here as King David here. It's a very different interpretation, because here King David is in the story and she knows it because she's coming out of the pool. Okay, the devil is in the back and the whole Gehenna scene is in the back. She is walking towards King David. There's no way she's not noticing him, and he's in the room, but he's still peeping, right? He's still over like one of the marble stones in the public
Black hand
bath,
over his
Like a
shoulder.
monkey?
right?
There's a
And
black hand over his shoulder.
Monkey? Like it's a monkey's hand.
oh, interesting.
in the early
And this
Gorilla.
is also a reference to the story of Susanna, okay? Because we have like the elders that are watching, so they're watching from all sides. So this is Bathsheba and Susanna, a story sort of like combined. And the trouble with this approach is that it only confuses the fact that David asked her to commit adultery or possibly even raped her, although he's eventually punished for his sins, as they consist of the breach of 2 commandments, adultery and the murder of Uriah. In Bathsheba's stories, virtue is abandoned, and here it's all about male power, which triumphs.
And again, it's the turn of the 1900s to the
And the
1900s.
earlier one was,
The seduction and
pretense
the
of modesty and seduction. This is like,
This is the industrial age. Okay, we're moving into the industrial age.
So, she's not pretty
I'm
here.
so
either.
unaware that
But
there
she's
were so
not
many
ugly
pictures
there.
of David and Bathsheba.
She's just
So
a
she's not
form.
what?
I was so unaware that there were so many paintings of David and Bathsheba.
Yeah, so I hope you find it interesting. Next week we're finishing our series, and we're going to do 20th century and 21st century. If anyone finds something interesting and they want to send it to me on email, I could add it as well. And it is fascinating. I mean, this is just a small part of what's out there on David and Bathsheba. But I try to bring the ones that are
I have a
most
question
interesting.
with
Yeah.
let's say the later Middle Ages, I mean Rembrandt and so on. These paintings of Sheva, were they specifically commissioned to show that, or were they strictly the artist what he wanted to paint?
So it depends, So William Blake had a few of these commissioned. Okay, I'm sure Rembrandt was probably commissioned, and then as we see, like the apprentices are copying the masters, and they're taking from the letter. It's sort of like everyone's like going to the Eiffel Tower and, taking pictures, the same picture repeats again and again. Everyone goes to the Statue of Liberty. So it's sort of like, that's what you want to paint in that era. But some kings and some, aristocracy wanted a lot of the Bible paintings to show off. So they commissioned a lot of that as well.
So a lot of what King David did that was good for the Jewish people is what is known through our history as a keeping Tom.
Well, this is in the story of Bathsheba, right? There are many other paintings of King David, okay, with Goliath, for example. That's a very, if we go back and study, maybe after the high holidays, we could start studying, other stories of, looking at other angles on King David.
Isn't there a painting
King David and Goliath is a big one. There's a story of Absalom, his son, that rebelled against him. So there are a few interesting scenes of him. Yeah.
Rabbi, all these paintings are painted by Christians and their perception of the Bible. Is there ever an association with David representing the Jews? Is it ever
by the Christians?
By them. Is it ever is it always just the biblical David, or is it saying these are what the Jews are like? Because there's a lot of biblical.
No, they don't look at any characters of the Bible as Jews. The Jews are the ones who came after the Bible. They're the ones that obstructed the Bible. The Israelites, which is King David, are not, it's sort of like it's like the Islam looks at the Jews, at the original Jews, but but they got it wrong. They sort of like detracted from the way it should have been. And also in Christianity, they look at the Israelites as sort of like, we the Christians are the continuance of the Israelites of the Bible, and Jesus is actually the offspring of the house of David.
Yeah. So
Jesus is the direct descendant of King David.
So is David seen in a positive light? Because to me it's not, but I'm wondering how they're seeing it.
Well, so this is a good question. I'm not sure all these artists had to paint religious paintings. These are not necessarily religious paintings. These are modern interpretations. I mean, not modern. These are like current interpretations that, maybe I'm not sure how the clergy, how the church looked at these paintings.
Yeah.
Some of them are in the Vatican, so they couldn't run away from it. It had to be there because this was like, they couldn't make everything nice and pretty.
Because the nudity is not offensive to the period, so we look at it in different eyes. So,
we look at it more Puritan way.
For them, that was not offensive at all. It's not a sexual statement. The breast is not a sexual statement, but it's interesting that I'm wondering because Moses is presented with horns. So what?
That's a mistake.
But that's not a bad thing. That's because he has like
beams of light are shining on Moses.
It's like beams of light.
They got the Hebrew word wrong.
Yeah. And also, I read somewhere, again, I'm not expert on Middle Ages time, but like what we think that it was all modest, etc. It's like it was very promiscuous. I read somewhere that people would be sleeping around in the monastery, like people would sleep there, and like they would having sleeping together at the same time. Like it was very because there were no rooms, no private rooms. Everything was very small and condensed. It was very different. Yes.
This is just an aside, but where did the black slave come from? And what are they painting?
That's very interesting. We saw it in a few paintings, and I thought about that as well. I think that it's sort of like there was a negative attitude at those times towards Black people. They were considered maybe not less than race, etc. Something which happened throughout history, till today. But here more specifically, it's because the Black maid is bringing the bad news. It's like something which was considered at those times as bad is bringing the bad news. So it's like it highlights the drama and the tension between the innocent, beautiful, white, blonde, or red hair, but Sheva with that message coming from that
But
messenger.
didn't they have,
Wait,
they
conquering
had
lands.
Nubians.
I was gonna say conquering lands. If you were a
Civilization.
successful king and you conquered other lands, you hit Egypt, of course, and
They were
Africa.
very afraid of them. They
But,
were very
but
afraid
they
of them.
brought the blacks in.
Yeah,
Out of I think they called
because
it.
they were slaves. They were
Helnets or
like cheap
Helvanics, I
labor.
can't
And
remember the
the
word.
Moors were black.
The Moors were black too, so you go to the north of, they
Yeah.
were,
So
the
there
north
was always-
of Africa, thank you. And deeper even Africa and Egypt,
Right.
of course. That's where that's the influx. If you were a
Right.
successful king, you conquered those lands and brought them back as
Right.
slaves or people who were to be converted.
But whenever anybody conquered somebody else, they brought them back as slaves.
Didn't they?
That was just
That was
a
how
common-
the
Jews
Right.
went.
Yeah, you needed somebody to build those buildings, sweep those floors.
Babylonia.
Okay, so we will conclude it now today.